Thank you. There's a little subtitle to my talk that I didn't want to publish because I felt some people might not catch the real spirit of it. Embracing the suck. But let's start with a little funny story. There's this archaeologist, New York archaeologist, digs down about 10 feet and finds a copper wire. And he says, oh, I'm pretty sure this is about 100 years old. So New York had a telephone system 100 years ago. California archaeologist digs down about 20 feet, finds a copper wire and says, well, this is about 200 years old. So proof that Californians were 100 years ahead of New Yorkers. Texas archaeologist digs down about 30 feet, doesn't find anything. Says, well, this is proof that Texans were wireless 300 years ago. Everything's always bigger and better in Texas. I was raised in Texas. But life will suck sometimes. Let's be honest with each other. There are days where you just are kind of going through the motion, but you keep moving forward. You may have a career path that you want to follow, but trust me, it will never go as you plan. So I would not be here if my parents hadn't divorced when I was 10. And there's a chain of events that happened over the years that I didn't recognize until I looked backwards. People always say, don't live in the past. But without recognizing the areas in the past where Jesus definitely directed my path, without recognizing that, I would have just simply marked it up to circumstances. But He gets all of the glory. So I wouldn't be here today if an Ironman race in Canada hadn't have gone south. But God gave me a little special gift on that day that we'll talk about later. The Ironman race in Canada wouldn't have gone south if my brother hadn't have died at the age of 42 and given me a wake-up call to get healthy. I wouldn't have been introduced to triathlons if my network administrator at the time wasn't a triathlete. I wouldn't have been working at Chattem Chemicals with that network administrator if I hadn't have sold my interest in our nursing home company and stayed in the Chattanooga area rather than move down to Florida. I wouldn't have sold the interest in the nursing home business if there hadn't been pressure to move back down to Florida where all of our nursing homes were. But then we wouldn't have been in Chattanooga in the first place if my wife hadn't have wanted to leave Florida where we were for the first 9 years of our marriage. But I wouldn't have met my wife if I hadn't have started my career in Orlando. And I wouldn't have started my career in Orlando if I hadn't have attended Union College. Or, in 2 months, Union Adventist University. That's going to be hard for me to get used to. In fact, this afternoon I'm going to go to the bookstore and buy things that are specifically Union College just so I can hold them. You know, they're going to be collector's items. I believe it. But I wouldn't have attended Union College if I hadn't have attended Ozark Academy. I wouldn't have attended OAA if I hadn't have run away from home at 15 years of age. I wouldn't have felt the need to run away from home if my stepdad hadn't been such a jerk and my dad remarried an Adventist lady. He wouldn't have remarried the Adventist lady if my parents hadn't have divorced when I was 10. See those chain reactions there? of how God directed my path to be here today. Of course, I knew all of these things were happening as they were going on, and I was so wound up in the story that I forgot to give you guys a little glimpse of what I was like at Union in 1984. Yes, this is me, and yes, oops. That's how Lisa and Barry remember me, and Terry, and Debbie, Howie. I was talking to, who was I talking to last night? In my dreams, I still have a full head of hair. Is that weird? I'm sure some psychologist has something to say about that. But wherever you are now, for me anyway, where I am now, the journey is not linear. It's definitely a wandering path, but only when I look from where I am now back to the beginning does it really make sense to me. And it's been humbling seeing how Jesus has been so directional in my life. So going through a divorce as a kid is tough. We know it happens, and it's tough on the parents. But going through a divorce it impacts the kids also. Bouncing between two homes and hearing my parents belittle each other certainly didn't make for a healthy, nurturing environment. While my dad was the alcoholic, my mom was the abusive one. She would take her frustrations from arguing all night with my dad, take them out on us kids the next day. She wore lots of rings on her fingers, and those fingers would find our face frequently. So my personality is one of a peacemaker. So I would go out of my way to try to keep things calm in order to not have anything directed at me. But in addition to the stress at home, I had a debilitating stuttering problem. I couldn't even raise my hand and ask a question in class without stuttering through it. It wasn't until I spent time in Africa that God took the stuttering away from me. Again, a humbling experience realizing that God had a plan for me. And I needed to keep moving forward. I needed to, when times are tough, embrace the suck. So I was 14 years old, 2 weeks away from my 15th birthday. I ran away from home. We lived in Houston, Texas. My dad and stepmother were in Northwest Arkansas. So I spent the next 2 weeks in Arkansas with them. And my biological mom would tell us this phrase to scare us into being good. She'd say, do you want to live with your father? Well, pack up your bags and go now. And we'd usually like, no, we're good. But this time I was going to call her bluff. So I come back home after Christmas, already feeling like this is not my home anymore down in Houston. I even knocked on the door. So I had already psychologically checked out. And of course, my mom asked the question, and I called her bluff. She and my stepdad spent the next 2 hours trying to talk me out of it. The last thing that I had to do that totally broke my heart was I had to tell my baby brother, who was 7, that I was leaving. But I knew I needed to go. I needed a father figure. I needed a home environment that was nurturing. And my stepmother created that. She's the one who introduced me to Jesus, and she will always have an extra special place in my heart. But I embraced the suck and kept moving forward. While at Ozark, sophomore, junior year, something like that, I went home to Houston to visit my biological mom. I keep referring her to that because I'm so close to my stepmom, I just call her mom. All my parents have passed away now, so it helps me to keep them separate if I'm just simply in a conversation referring to mom. So I went home to see my biological mom, and a family friend who was just getting caught up with me said, "You know, you are so much like your dad, you're probably going to end up unsuccessful and broke like him. If you're not careful." He added that afterwards when he realized he was being rude. But, I did not know that that sparked a drive in me. A drive to be successful, to set goals, to figure out how am I going to achieve these goals. There was a teacher at Ozark that was extraordinarily kind to me, Dave Burkhart. And he's the one that first suggested that I look at Union. He said, "I know I'm supposed to promote Southwestern, but you really need to look at Union." And I trusted him. Best decision that I had ever made at that point. My wife and I chose not to have kids, but I told her if we ever had kids, I don't care what they do. They're going to Union first, and then they can do whatever they want, and we'll pay for it. But I'm not paying for it if they go elsewhere. They're going to Union first. So yes, I do fly the colors. I showed up here without even being accepted as a student. Mailed in an application, never heard anything back. I knew when registration was, so I showed up. Union accepted me on a conditional basis because they didn't have Ozark's transcripts of my grades. That will come back and haunt me later, and we'll cover that. But I wasn't here alone. My stepbrother Todd, who graduated from Ozark a year before me, waited a year so we could go to college together. That little gesture showed me the bondhood of brotherhood. And we're still extremely close to this day. In fact, when our parents subsequently divorced while I was at Union here, he told everybody, he's like, "I don't care what happens to our parents, but Ed will always be my brother." So a pivotal point showing me the love of a brother. After my second year here, I accepted a call to go to Malawi, Africa as a student missionary. Without your prompting, you were born there, right? Yeah. My dad drove me to the Tulsa airport in 1985, and he could tell I was scared stiff. I had never been on any kind of an adventure like this. And he says, "Son, we can turn the car right around and go back home if this is too much for you." I said, no, I need to go. I need to follow through on this. Without me knowing that phrase, I was definitely embracing the suck. I don't even remember my dad going inside with me in the terminal. I probably blocked it out because I was so scared stiff. But that year in Africa completely changed who I was as a person, and subsequently changed the direction of my life. That's probably this mark right there. So thank you, Union College and Rich Carlson, for having a student missionary program. That's such an integral part of the personality of Union College. I was engaged at the time. Girl that I met here. You may remember her. Her name was Miriam. I had changed so much in Africa that it scared her. And she ended up eloping with another guy that she was seeing on the side while I was in Africa. I was devastated. I spent probably 2 days in my room crying. But if that hadn't have happened, I wouldn't have met my wife of almost 33 years down in Orlando. Again, a little deviation on that line. But God found He had the perfect person set up for me. So here comes the interesting thing about Ozark. About 2 weeks before graduation, I was working on the 5th floor in the accounting office, student accounts, and I get told that I can't graduate because they don't have my Ozark transcript yet. Like, okay, no problem. Ding, 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 ding. Oh, sorry. Ring, ring, 0, ring. Some of you don't understand. It's like, hey Siri, call Ozark. Yeah, there was no Siri. So I call him up, ask for the transcript. Oh, you owe like $1,400 on your bill still. We can't release it. Like, oh no. So I go to administration here. I'm like, okay, here's the story. Would you consider paying the $1,400 for me, add it to my already huge bill here, so that I can start paying it off after I start working? No, we can't do that. Ozark, would you please release it so that I can start working so I can pay you off? I can't get a job until I graduate. I can't pay you off until I get a job. I get a phone call a couple days later. The gentleman did not identify himself. And I still to this day do not know who it was. But he said, I've heard about your situation. And I've paid off Ozark. I've put some money down on your bill here to help you out. All that I ask is that when you're able to, you do it for other students. My wife and I have kept that promise all these years later, and we will continue keeping that promise. Again, what the devil meant for bad, Jesus means for good. So I started my career in Orlando, Florida at Florida Hospital, and I was recommended for that job by Grover Barker. Taught accounting here, and I'm forever grateful for the confidence that he saw in me. They didn't have the budget to fly me down for an interview. It was just simply over the phone. And I'm walking up the street to meet with Rich Reiner in somebody's kitchen. And it was just, if you want the job now, it's yours, trust us. So I boxed up everything, called UPS and said, ship everything down, sight unseen. After about 8 years at Florida Hospital, I began working for Life Care Centers of America, a nursing home company. And they eventually moved us to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where we've been for over 26 years. About 4 years or so in the Chattanooga area working for Life Care, a couple other guys and I left and started up our own nursing home management company, securing leases for nursing homes in the Tampa, St. Pete area of Florida. So flying down Monday morning, flying back Thursday night, working from home on Fridays, got old. And after about 3 years, sold out my interest in the nursing home business, because we, after much prayer, felt impressed that it was more important to enjoy where we're living than to chase the money. And the money was really great, I'm telling you. Something I didn't expect. But it was important for our marriage and for our relationship with Jesus in our marriage. So walked away from it. I spent the next year networking in the Chattanooga area and job searching. And it was very discouraging. But God had something planned for me. I just needed to be patient. I needed to trust in God's character when the answers didn't come. I learned that from a friend of mine yesterday evening, Terry Boulay, that if you put your faith in prayer, you're going to be disappointed. You need to put your faith in God's character. So, at that time, putting my faith in God's character, trusting Him, it took me several months to get to that point. But networking around town, learned that there was a small company that was struggling, needed help. And I've spent most of my career in turnarounds or startups. And so I joined Chattem Chemicals as their CFO 19 years ago. They were really struggling. They were unprofitable. They were cash poor. They were highly leveraged. And the auditors were trying to issue a going concern. Who's taken auditing classes here? Any of you two auditing classes? A going concern means that this time next year, this business may not be here. So I talked him out of it because I could see where we could go, and like, I just joined here, give me a year and I'll show you progress. I said, it's going to take us about 2 years to really turn things around, but give me a year and you'll see the progress. And so they agreed. And it took us just over 2 years to really turn things around. And we are an incredible success story for the Chattanooga area now, 19 years later, where we have increased we have doubled the workforce and increased sales an average of 25% each year over the past 19 years. And on Friday last week, I told my boss that I'm retiring at the end of June. He was not happy, but we've got a transition plan that we're working through, but it's time. But shortly after I started work at Chattem Chemicals, my older biological brother died. He had gone through a divorce and lost even visitation rights of his 4 kids, but he turned his life around and was going back to church, and I was so incredibly proud of him. He had a bleeding ulcer that blew up on him, and he lasted about 10 minutes. It was a wake-up call that I really needed to get healthy. 5 months later, I did my first triathlon, and I was hooked. So now, 18 years of racing, over 100 races under my belt. I learned that setting goals and figuring out a way of achieving those goals is highly addictive to me. Having an alcoholic father, I have a tendency to have an addiction to things. Fortunately, my addictions have been work and setting goals and things like that, whereas my other biological siblings, their addictions are substances. So, over that time frame, I've learned several things that have helped me in my Ironman racing that I've applied to the business world. Now we're coming to the talk. But first things first, you got to start your day with prayer. And in the business world, you've got to start your day with a list. So at the end, I don't do this all the time, but I find that when I do it, it works so much better. It's a hard habit to get into, but at the end of your day, write down a list of things you need to accomplish tomorrow while it's fresh on your mind. When you come in the next morning, it's sitting right there. Here's what I need to accomplish today. And check them off. Things that you don't get done, that goes on the list for the next day. So, starting your day with prayer and a list. Ironman racing. If you're going to do an Ironman, you gotta visualize what you're going to do. Visualize myself crossing that finish line. In the business world, visualizing your business's success is extremely helpful. When we were trying to turn this company around, I sat down with our leadership team and I said, guys, what do we want to see out of this? Where do we see us in 5 years? Where do we see us in 10 years? Let's very broad strokes, map it out. And then let's start building a plan how we're going to get there. But without visualizing it ourselves and saying it out loud and writing it down, we're just going to flounder. So I'm a coach as well. I teach Ironman athletes. And so we use a program called Training Peaks. I create workouts for them every day of the week. Sometimes there's 2 workouts a day, other times there's a rest day. But I tell them exactly what to do. And so the plan is mapped out over the course of 12 weeks or 16 weeks or 20 weeks. It depends on the athletic level of that athlete and where and how big of a goal do they have. I've got one athlete now that his goal is he wants to qualify for the World Championships. Like, okay, great goal. Been there, done that several times. Love it. Here's what it's going to take though. Most of his workouts are 2-a-days. It takes a lot of effort to reach those kind of lofty goals. Businesses create budgets. They create budgets not only 1 year out, but then there's a skeletal budget looking 2 years in the future. So you always have a 3-year plan. So you can keep track of, are you on track to reach where you want to be in 3 years, or do you have to make a big jump? Do I have to jumpstart the athlete into a little bit of fitness? We'll do a crash week, where this week you're focusing all on biking. You're biking every single day this week. It's a crash week to get your bike fitness up. So without a plan, you're not going to be successful. You got to measure that plan. So I do all kinds of graphs with my athletes where this is a maintenance, oops, I guess it is a touch screen. This is maintenance level here, and then we're doing a build, and then there's a slight taper, and then it's race day. So we do it stair step in order to get them to where they need to be. We measure these kind of things. Companies do it as well. One of the things that I do with all of my departments is, just like any other CFO, I give them all a comparative report within the first 10 days of the month, so they can see what happened last month compared to budget. And then I project forward based on this trend. Here's where you're going to be at the end of the fiscal year. Do you need to adjust something? Are you on track? Are you over budget in this area? Are you under budget? Do you have things coming up that you're holding back dollars for? Tracking that plan is extremely helpful. Got to have a coach. I do the coaching because I enjoy giving back. I enjoy helping people set goals and see them achieve them. But in the business world, you need a business coach as well. You need a mentor, somebody that's gone through this before, somebody that's got some wisdom that you can bounce ideas off of. Who are you modeling? Who are you going to learn things from? You want a positive coach, somebody that helps you focus on the good things, someone that encourages you, someone that looks to your future, not where it can benefit them. What do you want out of it? So find somebody that can be a mentor for you. And then you got to practice it. Of course, in the Ironman world, we're all about exercise. We're all about getting out there and swimming and biking and running and this and that. But in the business world, you've got to continue learning. You've got to get the CPE. Even if you don't get CPE credit for it, continue learning. I'm reading through a book now called Fanatical Networking. My mind does not think like a marketer, but I'm trying to learn that, trying to learn how do I cold call people. I'm a natural introvert, and so being up front here, I've learned how to do this, but it doesn't come naturally. And so cold calling people scares me to death. I'll do anything to not do it. If I go to a chamber networking event, I really want my wife there with me because she's definitely the extrovert. And I don't want to walk up to people and introduce myself. It seems simple, but it's hard for me. My wife and I launched a little side business a year ago. I know, as if my day job and the coaching wasn't enough. We launched a little side business a year ago called DumpsterToday, dumpster rentals. For the purpose of, once I retire, I wanted positive cash flow out of a business so we could fund charities that we support now while my income's high. That's the idea. In order to get the business going, though, I got to network all over town. I got to meet people. I got to meet builders and contractors and roofers and restoration companies, et cetera, et cetera. It's hard for me. But in the business world, you've got to continue educating yourself. Even at the age of 60, I've got to keep learning things. Nutrition in endurance racing is a given. You know you've got to eat in order to compete. But have you ever thought about taking care of your body so you're a good employee, so you're a good member of your family, so you're there for the longevity of your family? Are you going to take better care of your once every 5-year car than you do of your once a lifetime body? I learned that the hard way, watching my brother die. And so, where I've had ups and downs with my weight over the years, whether I'm racing or non-racing, if I'm in race mode, I'm easy 10, 15 pounds lighter than I am now. I'm at a healthy weight, but it's not about the weight, it's about my fitness level. I have a resting heart rate of 45. Every time I give blood, they have to call in and get another nurse's approval. I'm okay with that. When I started all of the endurance racing, I was on the verge of having to take blood pressure medication. I had an inflamed prostate. I had a tremor from drinking too much caffeine. All that's reversed. Doctor says that I have the fitness of a 30-year-old. Great. It's wonderful being able to reverse those things. But what it does is makes me a much better employee. I've got the endurance to go a long day. And there are some very long days, unfortunately. But you'll work smarter, longer, and harder if you take care of your body, whether it's working around the house or working in your job. Lastly, mindset. You got to believe. You got to believe that you're going to cross that finish line. 50% of your success is in your head. Before my first Ironman race, about 4 weeks before, I had a bike wreck and fractured my elbow, partially dislocated my shoulder. And I'm thinking, all of this training, am I going to even be able to finish this thing? Am I going to be able to even swim? It was painful, but I kept visualizing, I got to cross that finish line. I got to cross that finish line. And that's a picture of me crossing the finish line of my very first Ironman. Do I look happy? So setting goals and knowing how you're going to achieve them. We are running low on time, but whatever you do, honor God. Be it in your hobbies, in your work, in your relationships. It all matters. God may place you in a secular work environment for just the purpose of being an influence to others. Don't be discouraged by that. I had started at Chattem Chemicals, and 2 years into it, roughly, I had an employee come to my office and say, I've got something personal I want to talk over. About that time, I was questioning Jesus, why am I here? You know, I know I've got skills that you gave me in order to help businesses. My mind thinks like that, and I'm using that. But outside of that, why am I here? So this employee comes and says, I got something personal that I need to talk over. Come on in, come on in. And why me? He says, because I've been watching you over the past 2 years as you've worked so hard to turn this company around, and you've remained calm in the face of a lot of pressure. And I've watched how you carry yourself and how you treat other people. And I think that you're someone who I can trust. Wow. Thank you, Lord. That's why I'm there. To be an influence to other people. There's a film. I can show it. We're out of time, or you can look it up on that website. I did an Ironman race up in Canada that did not go well at all. And the Cliff Notes version is, I started throwing up in the swim. And I call him my angel, but another athlete stopped his race and held me up out of the water as I was throwing up. I got a cold on the flight up there, and it culminated into sickness and fever, and he held me up, stopped his own race. I got out of the water. You know enough about me by now that I'm definitely going to be embracing the suck. I got out of the water, got on the bike. No, I didn't quit. Got on the bike. 20 miles later, I just felt feverish again. I'm like, oh, I just need to stop. I'm done. But this praise hymn pops into my head, and it gave me a little encouragement, and I kept going. And that kept happening every single time throughout this was a long race for me. It took me 14 hours. You've got 17 hours to get it finished, 7 a.m. to midnight. This was my longest one yet. And every time that I was discouraged, wanting to quit, this praise hymn kept coming into my head. Afterwards, after the race, I get taken to medical, and they take my temperature, and I've got a 103 temperature. Yeah, okay, I shouldn't have raced. But I was embracing the suck and moving forward, and God chose to take that race and make it about Him, encouraging me, rather than me doing something selfish like Ironman racing. The next day, I was going to tell my wife, Britta, about this, but I couldn't remember the song and was actually thinking, was I hallucinating? Well, it's possible. And all week long, I couldn't think of it. The next Sabbath morning in church, the very first song that they sang was that song. And I just started bawling because I realized what an incredible gift God gave me. The song title, the verses from that song that kept repeating in my head was, I will not fear the war, I will not fear the storm, my help is on the way. And when I told this story 2 weeks later in church, there was a couple of film students from Southern Adventist University's School of Film, and they heard it and they said, "This is going to be our senior project." So they came up and talked to me afterwards, and I said, "I'll do it, but we've got to make sure that this film is about Jesus, not about me, because this is way too personal." And they did a great job with it. And those 3 kids that worked on that film, when they graduated, they all 3 had job offers because of this film. This film has won multiple awards at not only Christian film festivals, but secular film festivals. It's only about 10 minutes. Watch it at your leisure. But this has turned into a little ministry on its own. 2 weeks ago I was at Collegedale Academy. Again, I've been there like once every 4 years as they rotate through talking about this film. But I've been humbled to look back over the years and see the various points where Jesus specifically directed my path to get me here today. This film created awareness of my journey to health. But it's more than just the Ironman racing to me. It's about us preparing for heaven. We've got to treat people with compassion and dignity in our business jobs, because people are watching us, and we need to be a positive influence to those people around us. When someone needs help, you step in and help, like that person who lifted me up out of the water. Thank you. Are there